It's my opinion that the future of guitar tone is essentially going to be modelling based, and I think we might already be closer to it than we think. As a case in point, when I ask you to think of the most popular and most ubiquitous delay pedals in the world, what do you kind of see when you think about that? Possibly you might see something made by Boss, a DD3 or a DM2 or something like that. But I'm betting there's a fair chunk of you that may have thought of the Line 6 DL4 or the Strymon Timeline. And this is kind of my point entirely, that we've already gone past the point by many, many years where we already accepted that modelling was the way to go in many cases for delay. And I think we're now at the point where if people like Guthrie Govan, if people like Joe Satriani are choosing to use modelling when even they could use real amps, they could use whatever, basically, if anyone has a budget, it'd be those sorts of guys, I'd imagine, then we must already be quite a way down the road toward modelling. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I'm someone who really likes real amps and who really likes modelling, and I'm still pretty convinced that while on recording, or if I'm sat in a control room and the amp is in a live room, I mean, I just did this a few days ago. To me, the feeling of playing a real amp through mic preamps and through mics and all that, coming back to the control room, there's really nothing particularly distinct about that at all. I think we have been at the point for quite a while where modelling could certainly get us that feeling. The thing that is different is when halfway through the session I wanted some feedback and stuff, I went and stood in the room with the Mesa Boogie Mark III on 6 with headphones on to protect my ears, obviously. That's the thing that is missing from modelling, the massive amp in the room thing. But, live music these days, they're trying to stop you doing that anyway in many cases. Like a sound person doesn't want you to be at the level of the drums. They want to focus on the drums, they want to focus on the singing, all this sort of stuff. The other force that I think is at play here that is worth bearing in mind is that tubes became a little bit difficult to get hold of, and for a while transformers have been difficult to get hold of, and in a relatively niche space like the guitar amp space, I think that's important to note, because for instance Mesa Boogie are no longer building amps for Europe because of this lack of parts. And what we're seeing is companies building little solid state things, like Soldano or Friedman. Now that's not what I think of when people talk about real amps particularly. I think you might agree with me that probably we're normally thinking about something with some tubes in it, a big thing that's heavy. So there's some sort of supply chain issues that are meaning it's going to be difficult going forward, I'd imagine, to build amps, when I think probably it's been the case for quite a while that new amp sales, I'd imagine, have not been stellar for a while. I've got to imagine that that's the case, particularly when live music stopped for a couple of years, and the trend was already that people are exploring this modelling world anyway, right? I mean, I've seen oftentimes people saying, I'm buying my first modeler, I'm going digital. People talk about this all the time, and especially I think buoyed on by the fact that guitarists these days are very open to the idea of going digital and talk about it, whether it's Guthrie, Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, these folks that do dabble in this kind of digital realm. However, there is one little kind of blockage to this too as well, and we can see this manifest in the way that Neural DSP had to fight with a chip shortage. Fractal recently have had to completely, change the chips that they're using in the FM9. And I'm not sure what Line 6 are doing, but there's a chip shortage kind of worldwide, and this is meaning that even modelers, they're not able to keep up with demand for them. And what I think we're going to get to the root of is where we start to go native. Now, Line 6 have been ahead of the game on this for many years. With Pod Farm and these sorts of things, you were able to get the sounds from the hardware, but in your digital audio workstation. Helix Native, I think, is the cream of the crop for actually demonstrating that it's possible to have the sounds of the hardware decoupled from the hardware. None of the other major players have done that yet, but I'd imagine that will be where things go, particularly if it becomes an ongoing factor that is hard to source chips for any length of time, right? Because if you have to redesign a piece of hardware for new chips, presumably that's going to take way more effort than just creating a new plugin for Rabea, for example. I'm not sure how this works out for us as consumers, particularly whether that is going to live events and not having amps as much anymore. I think personally, as a consumer of music, for certain genres, I'd certainly prefer to see a live amp on stage and be hearing that, depending on the size of venue and that sort of stuff. And equally, I think if we go too far down the native route, then there's going to be an opportunity, I think, for companies such as STL, and there must be some others that go down the subscription route, which I think is definitely not great for a consumer, in my opinion, because, you know, if you stop your subscription, you're left with basically nothing. And I don't think that is particularly optimal either. So that's what I think is going to happen, because we're already so far down this route. We're going to see a lot more of this kind of digital audio workstation stuff. Neural DSP, I would say, are kind of hitting this marketing-wise pretty hard and doing a good job of it. And by also incorporating other kind of influency, it's so hot in here, influencer types, or, you know, big known names, Petrucci, Rabea. I think Devon Townsend is rumoured to be one of these, Tim Henson, Pliny. And also this thing that Pliny kind of reminded me, that there's guitar bands out there that have never really even owned a proper amp, right? And that wouldn't be unusual in other genres of music, but in a genre of music which is predominantly and totally focused on guitar, and Pliny's successful within this, to have never really owned a guitar amp, he's doing fine. I think that's potentially what we're going to see a bit more of, especially given that Neural DSP seem to be throwing quite a lot of money at these kind of artists, and that obviously will have an effect. So let me know in the comments if you can think of a new amp that's come out recently that you're interested in. Shut up, Jake. Or anything like that. I think, you know, amp building may be something that goes back to being quite boutique, you know, so 2Rock have scaled things down again, and long waiting lists and that sort of stuff. Mesa Boogie only building for the US now. I think there are enough used amps out there that people that are really interested in owning them can go and grab them, and you might see amps starting to be concentrated into the hands of collectors, right? I think that's also a thing that's happening with people starting up their own little eBay shops and reverb shops, and, you know, buying pieces of gear, leaving them and putting them up at high prices. That's been happening for a while now as well, right? I could see that being a thing as well. But let me know if you've got your favourite amp that's been released recently. Do you think amps are going to be around for forever? I think probably in some form they will be. I just think the trend is upwards towards modelling, right? Also, the whole profiling thing kind of went native this week as well, right? I think Amplitude have brought out their own little thing which can, software-based, do the same sort of job as a Kemper or a Quad Cortex. That's relatively interesting to see if that's going to be a thing that more companies do as well. For me personally, I really like to build my stuff from scratch, and I have enough faith in someone like Fractal or Line 6 that they do model the amp accurately enough that I wouldn't be able to tell the difference in a side-by-side comparison. And I've tested some of that myself, to the point where I don't think that there'd be any benefit in me, for instance, profiling my Lone Star rather than using an actual model of a Lone Star. Anyone tried the Amplitude thing yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's too hot.